In this video, I'll be walking through how to create an internal link placement AI agent. What that foundationally means is that we're going to create something that generates the output we see right here. It has the source URL where we're actually placing those links, the target URL where those links are actually pointed to, the anchor text that we're actually using to optimize, the placement notes, which is actually the AI explaining where on the page we should add the link, whether or not text adjustments are needed, and the final link placement, which is the actual text we'll be using, and whether or not it's actually been modified, which is in that on-page adjustment section right here. The input for these jobs will look like this right here, where you have the source URL, that's the place where the links are going, and the various target URLs. I do want to note that I have made some adjustments to the prompts to generate this output. So while you're watching the video, just be aware the most up-to-date prompts are found in the description of this video. Every part of the configuration in terms of the various components that we're going to use to create the workflow that we see right here are exactly the same. The only difference is that I've made some adjustments to the prompts that you'll find in each area. So again, just be cognizant of that. Use the ones I've linked in the description and just know that each of these components are the same. The only difference is going to be the prompts that you'll be adding into each component. With that, just a quick walkthrough of what we'll be creating. We'll create all of this starting from a blank canvas and build each component and walk through it all step by step, talk about how all the workflows work together. So at the end of this, you'll have this complete project that you'll be able to use for your clients. Starts with this chat input. We have various scrapers that scrape content, summarize content. Over here, we have a prompt and an agent structure that takes the summarized page content and the main content of the page and finds actual internal link opportunity areas. And then finally, we have that process that actually identifies the exact text that you want to update and where that internal link will actually be placed. So we'll move forward with this. But again, keep in mind that the prompts in their finalized state are found in the description of this video. During this tutorial, I will be using the Langflow software to actually create the AI workflows. In addition, I'm using a Datastax instance of that workflow. This is actually a free platform that you could go ahead and create your own account on. I don't know if it's going to be free forever. They might change that in the future. Langflow, the actual platform that we're building on, is open source, so there's a lot of different ways that you can actually deploy it and utilize it. But for this tutorial, I am using Datastax. Again, that might change in the future. I will link in the description this platform right here, as well as a few other options that you could utilize for this tutorial. One other thing to note before you jump into things is that if you want to just go ahead and test out this workflow, you don't want to go through the effort of actually building this all out, there is a very easy way to actually just go ahead and upload what I've already created for you and start testing it yourself. So in the description below, I have linked a file that you could download. And what will happen is that you could come in and click this upload a flow button here, choose the file I have provided in the link below, and it will actually just create the entire workflow for you. That will include everything we're going to create in this video. You could open it up and just go ahead and start making adjustments. From there, all you're going to need to do is add in your API keys, and you should be able to go ahead and start testing the tool immediately. The final thing to call out here is that you actually could go to ai.seoworkflows.com. I'll put this exact link within the description, and you can actually just go ahead and use this tool, test it out, figure out if this is something that will really be useful for your own workflows before investing the time to actually build this out. All you need to do is come into here. You can put a few different URLs. For example, if I want to link this page, and obviously I wouldn't do this, but you could put up to 10 pages in here, start the job, and then when the job is complete, you could open up the results and see it in here. So that is available to you as well. But for the time being, we'll jump into how to build this tool for yourself internally. Okay, so let's jump into things. The first thing I'm going to want to do is actually create a note on this display here. The reason I'm going to do this is I've actually already planned out how this application is going to work. I might just leave myself some notes right here So I could easily reference those while I'm creating the Langflow workflow here. Starting to build our actual application. Step number one here, we'll use the chat input and chat output to start and end our application. I'm just gapping them out so we'll have space to add this other functionality within. Secondarily here, we're going to need several components. We'll start off with prompts. We're going to need two of those, one for the content summarization and the other for the main content scraping. So we'll have two different prompt inputs. We're going to need some agents. So take an agent, put it right here, and we'll take a second agent and we'll put it down here. And lastly, we need that fire crawl scrape API. It's important that you use the scrape API because that's the one that will just get one individual page in contrast to crawling, right, which is going through, starting at the start page and crawling through the website. We just want to scrape individual pages. So we have this right here, and we're going to need to actually adjust this, as I mentioned before, to become a tool. So again, this does require some code, but I'm going to actually just supply that code for you. And all you have to do is come in here and click this code button. So you click onto the module and then click code. And then you'll copy and paste the updated code that I'll provide and then hit check and save. And now you'll see this little tool option show up right there. Now we could use this as a tool. We'll take this, we'll put it into tool right there. We'll put it into tool for the other agent. We'll connect these prompts to these inputs, and then we'll actually pause for a moment to just look at what's happening here. Oh, my other item I missed. Apologies. So we actually want to use these prompts as the agent instructions and this message as the inputs. So again, let's pause here for a second and just talk about what's happening here. So we have a chat input. That's like a user sending a message to an AI. That's that initial message that's happening. That message will be passed as the input to these two agents. So message being passed to the agent that's saying this is the user message. We will then have two different prompts that will be used for agent instructions. So this is what's considered more of a system prompt, meaning it will give instructions for the AI that will explain to it how it's doing, but it won't get confused with the user's actual input. It will have that clear distinction between this is instructions and this is what the user is asking us. And lastly, we have this tool. This tool is going to enable us to actually scrape pages. And the nice thing about agents is that it can actually iterate through options through this kind of planning phase that it does. So what will actually happen is we'll add in a few different URLs. We'll explain to the agent that it needs to scrape each of these, and it will actually go through and scrape each of these individually. When you're actually coding, this is a little bit more of a complex thing to do. You have to iterate, you have to kind of loop through each of the items to get it figured out. So the agent's actually going to handle that all for us. Jumping in the next steps here, I've actually already written some prompts for us. So we'll have a prompt here. So this is the summarization prompt. I'll quickly walk through this. It's definitely a very important part, but this tutorial is more talking about how to actually use Langflow versus how to write a prompt. I might create a video on how to write prompts at another time, but it very specifically explains that the agent should take the target URLs and to omit the source URLs. So this enables us to input both source URLs and target URLs, and the agent will solely scrape the target URLs for this right here. It provides some instructions. So again, it reiterates only use the target URLs. It also instructs the agent to use the tool, so to use this Firecrawl Scrape API tool. And that tells it, okay, we have access to this tool and we're going to go ahead and use that to actually scrape the pages. And then it tells them the exact output format we want. So it says strictly adhere to the output format. And what this actually means is that it'll have this start URL and URL summaries, and then it'll have the actual URL and this information within it. So it's just kind of putting in some hypothetical variables for the AI to fill in. And you see at the end of each section, it says, and so on for all primary sections. So what this actually is telling the AI to do is to create each of its primary headers, which in some cases might be H2s, in some cases might be H3s, as we notate right here in the instructions. And then from there, provide a summary for each section of the post. So at the end of this, we'll have all the different URLs we're trying to target, the headers that exist within those pages, and a description summarizing that section, which should give us enough context to actually target those internal links onto the pages. So we'll go ahead and save that. That prompt has now been added. Secondarily, we need one more prompt, which again, I've already put together. We'll open this up. And this is our prompt right here. So this is the actual scraping prompt just for the main content of the page. So the target URLs, the ones that we're going to add internal links to on the source page, we're just getting summaries for those pages. We don't need to know that exact content. We just need to know what the content's about to find a good place to internally link the pages on our source page, the page where the links are eventually going to go. So what this prompt is telling us is that we need the main content of the source page. So similarly, what this one actually tells us is that we solely want to look at the source URL and we want to ignore everything under the target URL. So it's going to look at this URL right here. It's going to ignore these URLs right here. Similar instructions to what we saw before, emphasizing that we're solely looking at the single URL under the source URL. And again, that's just trying to reinforce what we want the AI agent to do. And then we want to provide the output, which will be the entire page's content. And we're just doing markdown format because number one, it is pretty concise. So for example, if we ask for HTML, it's very verbose. It would be taking up a lot of AI tokens that we don't want to use. So Markdown's a more concise way that will give the AI the context it needs to actually do this correctly. If you don't know about Markdown, it's very, 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 very helpful for building these kind of applications. I would recommend, Googling what is Markdown, just read a blog post about it. It's fairly simple. Okay, from here, we're actually going to test out what we have so far. So we can actually come in here and we can run a test to ensure everything is working as expected and kind of view the various outputs. So a few different things I need to do to make that happen. First off, I need to add an input. So when you're actually using this and using it more in practice, there's a few different ways to do it. You can come in here and treat it just like a normal chatbot. If you're getting a little bit more technical or you have some developer support, you can actually use an API format. But for testing purposes, we could just come in here and we could add what the hypothetical user message is. So this is saying, a user inputs this message into the chat, and that's what's starting the chat flow. Of course, I'm not actually using kind of a message interface right here, but this will emulate that. So what I'm actually having here, and just to have a little disclaimer, not affiliated with Fool.com. I don't work with them in any capacity. I'm just using them as a hypothetical example here. So we have our source URL. So this is where we actually want the internal links to be placed. And we have our list of target URLs, which are the links that we actually want to show up on the above page. The one thing to actually keep in mind as well is that there are token limits to the AIs, right? So you could only do so many URLs before you'll start running into an issue where it's just too much context for the AI to actually handle. I've done up to 6 or 7 pages for the target URLs at once, but what you could of course do is, do 3 different jobs all with 4 pages and then, have 12 total internal links, which is what you might have to do just because, again, of the AI context limits. But moving forward there, we have our chat input. The other thing we need are our API keys. So if you don't have one already, you're going to have an OpenAI API key and a Firecrawl API key. So I have my API key. I'm going to just add them in right here. The last thing we'll do, just because I'll keep this one as 4.0 mini, but it's critically important that this one is precise with our direction. So I'll use 4.0, which has a little bit more power. It's a little bit more accurate, but it does take a little bit longer to process and does cost a little bit more money with the OpenAI API. And then we'll actually hit this kind of run component button up here to see if it works. If you want, you can actually open this up and you can see what's actually happening. So you can see the human, the user, inputted source URL, target URLs. From there, it is making the actual tool call, getting the information. You can see the summaries. We have the start URL summaries and URL summaries. And that is exactly what we wanted. You see it made 3 individual tool calls because our tool only actually scrapes one URL at a time. So the AI was smart enough to grab those 3 individual URLs, scrape the content, and then provide those summaries that we requested, which is right here at the bottom. So that worked perfectly. And you can actually see right here, and another thing you could do, if you click right here, so you can actually see a little bit more technical response, and you could kind of click into here to see what we were just looking at, and you can see that for all the different components that have a response. And here we'll test the second component to ensure that's all working properly as well. Again, you could open up this right here to see what's going on. You see the initial summaries, and we should see for the second part here, it's only doing the one single URL. So that's exactly what we wanted. We only wanted to be looking at the one single URL. Again, if we look at this prompt right here, we see that we just want the source URL, and that's the one we're getting the main content for, whereas alternatively, we're getting the summaries for the target pages. So we see that the agent was built successfully, and this is our output right here, which actually has the target URL marked down. Similar to the other component, if you come in here and click response, you can open this up and you can see how this looks. Moving along here, we now have the 2 core outputs we need. We have our summaries and we have our actual main content of the page where we want to add the internal links. I moved this over here just so it's a little bit easier to see. And we'll go ahead with adding these kind of finalization steps where we actually create the targets and then find the actual placements for the internal links. So there's actually this handy component called combine text, which is really nice for something like this because you can actually merge 2 different responses together, which will be very handy in what we need to do here to supply the next agent with the necessary output. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to put the response here to the top, the response here to the bottom, and then I'm going to do \n \n. That means just 2 new lines. That will make it so there's a little bit of a gap in between the 2 responses there. So that will be our combined text. We also need another prompt component. So I'll come in here, grab prompt, add this right here. And similar to before, I actually have already created that prompt. So I'll go ahead and add it in here. This one's a bit more involved just because it's very important that it follows a pretty strict steps in identifying the links and what it needs to actually do here. So it kind of explains that it's an internal linking strategist. It lets it know that it should expect content that looks like this, which is the start URL summaries and URL summaries with the summaries within, and then the start target URL markdown, same stuff we were just working on that we're going to be combining in that combined text component. And then it kind of describes here what it should be expecting and do what it should actually do with the information. So it talks about analyzing the target URL content, identifying the linking location, creating linking instructions. So this is actually within the output, there'll be link placement notes to guide either the user or an AI, because we're actually going to use an AI to do this, to guide it in how and where it should be actually placing these links, providing those instructions, determining the anchor text that makes the most sense, handling no link cases, so instances where the page we inputted just really doesn't make sense. It doesn't force that link. It actually takes that and says, this doesn't make sense and here's why, and won't give you a recommendation. And it tells it to repeat those steps for all URLs. So at the end, we'll have this table. It'll look like a table when we actually look at it in the UI, and it has the target URL, the anchor text, and the link placement notes. So we'll grab those. And lastly, we'll need an agent again. Technically, you could do this with a chat input as well. I've just had more success with agents and using this kind of processes, so I generally use an agent to do it. Why could we use a chat input? When I say chat input, we can come in here and we can say, hey, OpenAI models, and we can actually just feed this as the system message, and this right here, this combined text is the input. but I've generally had more success with agents, so I'm going to just use that. Why does it not need to be an agent? Because an agent usually needs some kind of tools. This doesn't require tools. This is just a AI taking in some content and responding to that content, so it doesn't actually require an agent. But again, I've had more success using agents. I don't really know the technical reason why, but that's why I'm using it, just to provide that context there. So I'm going to use 4.0 again, just because this is a pretty complicated process where the steps are critically important to follow. And this is what we need there. This is the next step, right? We have our prompt, we have the combined text, and we feed that all into the agent. I'll go ahead and run this now just to ensure it's all working. So opening up this up here, just looking at the output, this is what we have. We have our target URL, and I realize this is in Markdown. We can actually just use a Markdown preview tool to make this look a little nicer. Take a look at it kind of like this. So we have our target URL. So these are the targets that will actually exist on the page. And we have where on the page it will actually exist. So link in a section discussing the correlation between credit scores, mortgage approvals, as understanding home prices. So you'll actually go in there. This section is where you would find it, and then you would actually place the links. We do see right here that it does give one example saying that this is not relevant. So this was a post about credit scores. We had how to buy stock as one of our links that we were trying to target. So it's saying this doesn't relate, it doesn't make sense. If you want to deactivate that and you wanted to try to place links regardless, you could actually just come into the prompt here and just delete this kind of handle no link cases line, and then it will try to force links in regardless of whether it thinks it's well targeted. So what we're going to need is actually two different prompts. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a second. Why do we need two prompts here rather than just one? So we need two different prompts, and we need an agent. Similarly to the last one, you technically could just use a normal chat input here. I've just had more success using agents here. I'm not sure why. That's just my experience, and that's why I kind of handle it this way. But we have the two prompts because the top one's going to be the system prompt. It's a pretty lengthy prompt. I'm not going to review every single step of it. The critical part is that we now have this link placement column. So before we had the target URL, anchor text, link placement notes. Now this will actually try to provide you with the exact sentence and anchor text and actually place it into the page. So all you have to do is kind of copy and paste into your actual CMS or whatever you're doing. You can hand it off to developers, those kind of things. So that's the critical adjustment here. Why is this a separate step? Just because there's a lot of considerations into placing an internal link kind of correctly or strategically in a way that makes a lot of sense. And I found that when I tried to include this as part of the last workflow where we're just kind of building out the grid of anchor text, target URL, and placement notes, I found that it doesn't do a very good job with the actual link placements. It's just asking it to do too many things. So I'm just taking this one component of it, breaking it out into a separate step, which in my experience has provided much better outputs. And then the second one, this is actually going to be very, very simple. I'm just using this to kind of create a structured version of the two previous outputs. So I'm pretty much kind of using it as a combined text component, but I wanted to be a little bit more specific with how I'm wrapping the previous outputs. So that's why I'm using this here. So again, I could have used like combined text and just put one on top, one at the bottom. Using this though, because it allows me to have a little bit more syntax, and I'm gonna be placing content right here. So I can make these variables whatever I want, by the way. If I want it to be XXX, I could call it XXX, and then you'll see XXX appears right there, but obviously that doesn't make a lot of sense semantically. So I'll put link placement grid and page content. I'll come in here and let's see here. So this is the link placement grid coming out of the agent that we just had there, and the page content is this. This is the actual when it grabs the main content of the page. So we're gonna have the input. So this is like the user input. This is hypothetically a user messaging the agent, even though it's kind of a programmatic way of doing it. And it'll show this. So you can imagine you're in a chat interface, you put start page content, and you threw in the entire page's content, end page content, start link placement grid, throw in that exact grid that we got from the last step, and link placement grid. That's what this is actually doing. So we're going to use that as the input, and we'll use this as the system message, and I will put my OpenAI API key in right here. And finally, we'll connect this response to the output. So if all goes well at this point, this is the entire flow. It is complete now. This will run end to end. It will give us those link targets. So let's go ahead and hit play and see what happens. And here we have our final output. You see we have the link placement notes, which talks to the preceding header where actually on the page this will be located, and the surrounding text, which is where on the actual page within the actual content we'll actually want to place that link. So that is the step right here where we come in and we actually tell it to target the links. And then the placement is that last step where we actually get the text that will actually add in. These kind of things can be handed right off to the development team to take it from there. You'll actually see the full text that you want to link. So if we actually come in here and we look up, let's use this. So we find holding steady despite inflation putting pressure on Americans and record levels of credit card debt. And it's recommending we link credit card debt that you can see right there with the actual link placed. This one right here, similarly, we could take this information, plug it in, should be able to. Residence, Minnesota, yada, yada, yada. Oh, accidentally I switched pages to the one that was first internally linked. So there's that statement, the one that we saw right here. You can actually see with this one, it actually does recommend a new sentence being added. So the second one, it actually just added the link to pre-existing text, no text adjustments needed. The second one, it actually wrote some new text to make the link make sense within that context. So that's really helpful, right? It's not just finding places that already exist to link. It also will strategically write some text to flow within the existing content if needed for the post. So there you have it. The third link, of course, says the URL doesn't make sense, so it doesn't provide the recommendation. And then the first two, it does provide the actual anchor text and the link placement text.